Copyright disclaimer. Under Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. Okay, this is from Understanding Scientology by Marjorie Wakefield, Chapter 14. By the way, she did speak out a lot about the abuse of the children. Chapter 14. Brainwashing and Thought Control in Scientology. The Road to Ronroyd. The techniques used in modern brainwashing are not like the medieval torture of the rack and the thumbscrew. They are subtler, more prolonged, and intended to be more terrible in their effect. They are calculated to disintegrate the mind of an intelligent victim, to distort his sense of values to a point where he will not simply cry out, "I did it," but will become a seemingly willing accomplice to the complete disintegration of his integrity and the production of an elaborate fiction. Dr. Charla W. Mayo, the R of the mind. Since for some weird reason, we are no longer allowed to say the R word. And if I hear one more male talk about somebody that was R'd, that they had sex, I'm going to scream. Look it up. Just look it up in the dictionary. It's not hard. In part, the totalitarian state is sustained because individuals terrorize themselves. They become accomplices in their own tyrannization, censoring what they say. That's thought control and thought stopping, and even what they allow themselves to think and feel. Willa Apple, Cults in America. The effectiveness of a doctrine does not come from its meaning, but from its certitude. Crude absurdities, trivial nonsense, and sublime truths are equally potent in readying people for self-sacrifice, if they are accepted as the sole eternal truth. It is obvious, therefore, that in order to be effective, a doctrine must not be understood, but has to be believed in. Eric Hoffer, The True Believer. Most people think that brainwashing is something that only happens in communist countries like Russia or North Korea. There is some validity to this belief because brainwashing was developed in these countries. Oh, it's far more, you wouldn't even know, where it was used for psycho-political purposes. Brainwashing is defined as the process of causing a person to undergo a radical alteration of beliefs and attitudes. The brainwashed person is conditioned by punishment for undesirable beliefs and rewarded for expressing desirable beliefs. 1. Ex-cult members and their families are only too aware of the truth that brainwashing does exist in America. An uncomfortable reality has at last come home to the American public. Brainwashing, which once seemed exclusively a communist technique, is here in America and used by cults. Oh, there's more to it than that, just to let you know. Number 2. Hundreds of former cult members testify. This is so in court proceedings, public information, hearings concerning the cults, magazines and newspaper interviews, and counseling sessions. Psychiatrists and other professionals who counsel former cultists confirm this. These techniques include constant repetition of doctrine, application of intense peer pressure, manipulation of diet so that critical faculties are adversely affected, like beans and rice, deprivation of sleep, like Scientology, lack of privacy and time for reflection, complete break with past life, reduction of outside stimulation, like you can't talk to suppressives, outside stimulation and influences, the skillful use of ritual to heighten mystical experience, and the invention of new vocabulary and the manipulation of language to narrow down the range of experience and construct a new reality. Ronald N. Roth describes what he calls the seduction syndrome. Many of those inducted into a cult like Scientology come in searching for identity or for spiritual reality, and this is especially true of young people. Coming to grips with one's identity has always been a part of adolescence in America, but today's youth face difficulties compounded by the massive cultural and social upheavals that characterize the contemporary world, especially during the last decade. Despite the boom in entertainment and the pervasive impact of the mass media, youth often remain bored, unfulfilled, and lonely. The tendency to drift in and out of a job, college, and sexual relationships, uncertainty and anxiety regarding the future, discontent with economic and political structures, all contribute to isolation and loneliness. Most cult members had previous experience in a traditional church or synagogue. However, cult seekers have found these conventional religious institutions to be lacking in spiritual depth and meaning, incapable of inspiring commitment and providing clear-cut answers, and often hypocritical in everyday life. In contrast, the cults provide black and white answers to the questions of life. Cults not only provide firm answers to every question, but also make promises that appeal to those needing reassurance, confidence, and affirmation. Many people come into a cult such as Scientology at a time in their life when they are understanding unusual stress or crisis. An example of this is the first-year college student, away from home for the first time. Other precipitating life experiences that increase vulnerability include such things as a recent divorce of one's parents, or a similar serious problem in the home, the extended critical illness of a family member, a breakup with a girlfriend or boyfriend, poor academic performance or failure, or unpleasant experience with drugs or sex. When someone is feeling exceedingly anxious, uncertain, hurt, lonely, unloved, confused, or guilty, that person is a prime prospect for those who come in the guise of religion, offering a way out of our peace of mind, like way to happiness. And there are a small minority of people who are drawn to the cult because of chronic emotional problems, often as a result of growing up in a dysfunctional home. The lonely, the unstable, the vulnerable cult recruiters seem to have the ability to spot these people in a crowd. They seem to have a sixth sense for people who will make prime candidates for the cult. Recruitment of the vulnerable is one element in Roth's seduction syndrome. Other elements include intense group pressure and group activity, such as the experience by the newcomer on the introductory course, the communication course of Scientology, sensory deprivation, a lack of proper nutrition, and adequate sleep. Sounds like the military. Also experienced by Scientologists, who may be fed a diet of rice and beans as a punishment for inadequate production, like Downstat, and a dramatic change in worldview, the adopting of beliefs radically different from those held before. And also, too, I want to add, it's all that groupthink. Groupthink is dangerous. In another paradigm of brainwashing, Willa Apple describes the three-stage conversion process, which is also applicable to the Scientologist. In the first stage of the conversion, the recruit is isolated from his past life. First, the individual is isolated from his past life cut off from his former position and occupation, as well as those with whom he has emotional ties. 8. In Scientology, this is accomplished in several ways. In gradually adopting a new language, the recruit to Scientology is subtly separated from those in his past who no longer speak his language. All by design. And the use of the term WOG, a derogatory term to refer to all those outside Scientology, I believe he stole that from when he went to Britain, because L. Ron Hubbard noticed that a derogatory word for dark-skinned people, brown people, was WOG. Great guy, isn't he? The student is pressured to spend every available minute on course, to include children, by the way, instead of on frivolous pursuits outside Scientology, which are termed off-purpose. In the second phase of conversion, the loss of name and identity is reinforced by inducing the novice emotionally and intellectually to surrender his past life. They do that in the military, by the way. It's a huge thing. Humiliation and guilt are the basic tools of the psychological dismembering of the former self. In Scientology, this phase is accomplished in two ways. First, through the practice of auditing, also called the confessional, in which the Scientologist, over a period of time, divulge all the secrets of his entire lifetime. It's a blackmail material. And second, through the ethics process of writing up one's OWs, overts and withholds, in which the person records every wrong deed, real or imagined, committed in this and in the previous lifetimes. The Scientologist must produce these OWs until the ethics officer is satisfied that he is reduced to an acceptable level of contrition and humiliation. In the third phase of Apple's conversion, the convert assumes a new identity, like private, and a new worldview, like you can't be an ex something, or like an anti-something. In Scientology, this is accomplished through a rigorous process of indoctrination, through written and tape-recorded materials. The members' confidence in all previously trusted social institutions is ended and replaced with the belief that salvation can come only through Scientology. The person's new sense of identity comes from his or her belonging to the cult, as all other allegiances are severed. A third paradigm of mind control, or brainwashing, comes from George Estabrooks. In his writing about hypnotism, about which he was an expert, Estabrooks noticed that many of the elements of mob psychology used by cult leaders were very similar to techniques used by hypnotists. By the way, L. Ron Hubbard was hugely into hypnotism, and that comes from the black magic. He states that that these techniques were used by Hitler. They were also practiced by Hubbard. Yep. Of these 6 essential points in the psychology of the mob, the first is the cult leader will strive for a restriction of the field of consciousness among the members of his mob cult. I'm just going to pitch in here real quick, like examples of you're not allowed to go on the internet, you're not allowed to ask questions, whether it's Scientology or another cult. His ideas and his ideas only are to be considered by the mob cult. His followers hear only one line of thought, his line of thought. Does that remind you of, what would Hubbard do? What would Hubbard do? This will sound very familiar to a Scientologist. Scientologists are strictly forbidden against mixing practices from studying any other system of thought while in Scientology, which was exactly what Hubbard did, by the way. He stole stuff. Hubbard, as source, is regarded as ultimate authority and as infallible. Can you imagine that, you guys? Like, ugh. Any confusion or disagreement with anything said or written by Hubbard is regarded as a misunderstanding or misunderstood word on the part of the student. The second point in mob psychology is that the dictator will appeal to the emotions. Moreover, he will appeal to the baser emotions of fear, anger, hatred. I guess that kind of sums up the last 4 years, doesn't it? In Scientology, there's an appeal to fear and to guilt. The ideology in Scientology is that we are caught in a trap, and that Scientology is the only way out of the trap. Fear is also maintained within the group by the Office of Ethics, through which any doubts, disagreements, or failures within the group are punished. Members having serious disagreements or difficulties are threatened with expulsion and the label of suppressive person or eternal condemnation. This is a good article. Third, the mob cult leader will count on emotional contagion, an extremely important factor in all mob cult situations. Emotions are far more contagious than the measles. Humans tend to fit into the emotional pattern of a group. In Scientology, the prevailing emotions is a sense of urgency and of fear. Scientologists at work do not walk, they run. Everything is deadly serious and urgent. The world is at stake. Each small victory has added significance. Scientology is a group at war, and this mentality leads to fervor, enthusiasm, and a sense of danger to each activity, which will drain your adrenal glands. Fourth, we have the matter of social sanction. The individual feels justified in any action approved by the mob cult and its leaders. Because Scientologists believe themselves to be fighting for the salvation of mankind, any acts, even if they are illegal, which will contribute to this purpose, are sanctioned by reason of the greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics. The fifth element of mob psychology has to do with omnipotence, the I'm right, you're wrong reaction, which we see in the fanatic. It never occurred to the Nazi, it does not occur to the communist that there are two sides to an argument. The last 4 years, you weren't able to ask about anything, were you? Scientology to the Scientologist is the only truth. This fact has caused enormous frustration for many family members trying to reason with the Scientologist in their family. The mind of the Scientologist is closed to any other possibility than Scientology. There is no other side to the argument. Finally, there is a removal of inhibitions. Anything goes if the party sanctions such activity. Oh yeah, I'm just thinking Child SA, they're okay with that. 16, Jonestown was a shocking example of this aspect of the cult mentality. Scientology is another potential Jonestown, except on a much wider scale. She's not the only one that has said that. Robert Lifton identifies 8 features common to all forms of what he calls ideological totalism, 8 psychological themes common to an environment in which brainwashing is present. 1. Milieu control. 2. Mystical manipulation. 3. The demand for purity. 4. The cult of confession. 5. The sacred science. 6. Loading the language. 7. Doctrine over person. And 8. The dispensing of existence. Each of these features can be found in Scientology. In milieu control, the cult controls both the environment and the communication of the cult member. Scientology is a very controlled environment. The existence of the Department of Ethics provides the threat of punishment for all transgressions against cult norms. Even physical illness is considered the shortcoming of the person and evidence of the existence of out ethics. Communication with these outside Scientology WOGs is manipulated to achieve the desired ends of the cult. The cult members' communication with family members especially ones not favorable to the cult, is often dictated by the cult. Communication within the cult follows certain rules. Upper-level students may not discuss the contents of these levels, even with a spouse. All other Scientologists are forbidden to discuss their case or feelings with other Scientologists. Through the use of knowledge reports, KRs, members critical of the organization may be reported by other members, as in a communist state. If you guys think this is all an accident, I'm sorry, it's not. Got to read between the lines. In mystical manipulation, the group seeks to inspire in the member certain behaviors and feelings that seem to have originated magically from the environment. In Scientology, the member comes to think and believe, just as Hubbard teaches, thinking that these thoughts and beliefs are the result of his own cognitions or coming to truth. That's dangerous. I want to just add, guys, I believe it was Stephen Hassan talked a lot about that. That is so scary. So what they're doing is they're implanting this thought inside of your own mind, and they're making you think that you thought that thought. It's crazy. With the demand for purity, the experiential world is sharply divided into the pure and the impure, into the absolutely good and the absolutely evil. The good and pure are, of course, those ideas, feelings, and actions which are consistent with the totalist ideology and policy. Anything else is apt to be relegated to the bad and to the impure. A good example of this in Scientology is the redefinition of the word ethics, which comes to mean that which is good for or benefits Scientology. Can't help but think it reminds me of Mike Rinder. I can't help it, you guys. Well, anyone against Scientology is an enemy or an SP. Suppress a person. A good person is one who is most completely aligned with the goals and purposes of Mike Rinder. No, just kidding. Of Scientology. An evil person is one who opposes the greater good or Scientology. The cult of confession is carried out in Scientology through the many levels of auditing or confessionals and through the periodic writing up of one's OWs, overts and withholds. This purging oneself of both actual and imagined crimes leads to the gradual act of self-surrender to the group. One learns to think only those thoughts sanctioned and acceptable to the group. By the way, the children are going through this too. The totalist milieu maintains an aura of sacredness around its basic dogma, holding it out as an ultimate moral vision for the ordering of human existence. This is what Lifton calls sacred science. Scientology to a Scientologist is absolute truth, and there is certain comfort in this belief. Having black and white answers to the complex questions of life shields one from the insecurity and uncertainty of ambiguity, and this is one of the great attractions of Scientology for its members. Hubbard, a persuasive and dynamic speaker, makes many claims about the scientific validity of his science, none of which have ever been subjected to the rigors of the scientific method, but which are accepted at face value by his trusting disciples. The language of the totalist environment is characterized by the thought-terminating cliché. It is the language of non-thought. What would L. Ron Hubbard do? Scientologists have their own dictionary. A conversation between two Scientologists might not make sense to a non-Scientologist. Lifton states, the effect of the language of ideological totalism can be summed up in one word, constriction. He is, so to speak, linguistically deprived, and since language is so central to all human experience, his capabilities for thinking and feeling are immensely narrowed. An example of this kind of constriction of thought is the phrase in Scientology, "My 2D and I are in the ARC," which can be translated as, "The person I am romantically involved with, either as a lover or a spouse, and I have a great deal of love for each other. We share basically the same beliefs. We communicate well with each other, and there is a shared understanding between us, which is very positive." Other examples of loaded language are the words reality, ethics, and suppressive, the latter containing a word of meaning for a Scientologist. Lifton also describes the primacy of doctrine over person, the demand that character and identity be reshaped not in accordance with one's special nature or potentialities, but rather to fit the rigid contours of the doctrinal mold. A Scientologist is never allowed to think about the tech or the science developed by Hubbard. To alter the tech in any way is denounced as squirreling. Isn't that what David Miscavige is doing right now? For which crime one can be expelled from Scientology. Questioning the doctrine is forbidden. Doubts or questions are euphemistically relabeled as MUs or misunderstood words on the part of the student. The totalist environment draws a sharp line between those whose right to existence can be recognized and those who possess no such right, known as non-people. In Scientology, there are two types of non-people, WOGs and SPs. WOGs are those who have not yet to become enlightened as to Scientology. SPs, or suppressive persons, have no right to exist, and this is declared by Scientology's fair game law, which states that enemies of Scientology can be sued, tricked, lied to, or destroyed. This is the dispensing of existence within Scientology. One of the phenomena common to many cults is the personality change in the cult member after conversion. This has been a frightening experience for many families. Sometimes the change comes about gradually, and in other cases it occurs in a single experience called snapping by one team of researchers. The cult personality is radically different from the pre-cult personality. There is evidence that this change is organic as well as psychological. Exposing a person to a radical change in environment and an overload of new and radically different information may actually cause a change in the neurotransmitters in the brain. The substances norepinephrine and serotonin in the brain have similar chemical composition as mescaline or LSD. When sensory flow to the brain becomes either severely restricted or suddenly overloaded, it can trigger a state of increased suggestibility or the symptoms of disassociation or hallucinations. In Scientology, this can occur in hypnotic practice of TRO or during the long hours on the Scientology courses. Psychiatrist Dr. John Clark of Harvard University believes that the cults, including Scientology, are psychologically dangerous. In cults, people are presented with stressful circumstances, especially huge loads of new information at times in their lives when they are vulnerable, and they disassociate. That's the point. What the Scientologist and all the other dangerous cults do is maintain the disassociation. They keep the parts of the mind, the connections inside the central nervous system, divided in function, in action, and in their connection with the outer world. It's a way of controlling them, and the longer it goes, the further apart all of this gets to be, like the chronic schizophrenic. I personally believe that the way the Scientologist eyes look, a lot of them, that's disassociation. I mean, they're exhausted, and I think that has a lot to do with it, but that's why their eyes look like that. Did Hubbard really believe in Scientology, or was he just a calculating con man? Esther Brooks describes what he calls a sincere dictator. The dictator may be, generally, is a man of great personal courage. He plays along grimly till the last throw of the dice and meets his fate with his chin up. This may be because he is perfectly sincere. This sounds like a strange contradiction, but we must accept it. The dictator really believes that he is God's chosen instrument, or society's chosen instrument. If he does not believe in God to lead his group, or possibly the entire world, into the promised land, the resulting picture is not pleasant, and the individual who creates that picture is easily the most dangerous of all the mentally maladjusted. He has intelligence, conviction, drive, courage, and will be utterly unscrupulous, a combination which calls for serious concern. Those who knew him will agree, and this is a fair description of Hubbard. One important clue to the motivations of Hubbard lies in a book he wrote in the mid-1950s called Brainwashing Manual. I'm going to have to look that up. Although there were witnesses that Hubbard wrote this book, he attributed authorship to the infamous Russian politician Beria, then pretended to discover it. Yeah, he does that a lot. Some of the passages from the book reveal much about Hubbard. It is not enough for the state, Scientology, to have goals. These goals, once put forward, depend for their completion upon the loyalty and obedience of the workers, Scientologists. Like Brave New World. These engage for the most part in hard labors, have little time for idle speculation, which is good. Hypnosis is induced by acute fear, belief, like the last 4 years, Belief is engendered by a certain amount of fear and terror from an authoritative level, and this will be followed by obedience. The body is less able to resist a stimulus if it has insufficient food and is weary. Refusal to let them sleep over many days, denying them adequate food, then brings about an optimum state for the receipt of a stimulus. Degradation and conquest are companions. Kind of sounds like the LAPD. By lowering the endurance of a person and by constant degradation and defamation, it is possible to induce thus a state of shock which will receive adequately any command given. Any organization which has the spirit and courage to display inhumanity, savageness, brutality will be obeyed. Such a use of force is itself the essential ingredient of greatness or psychopath. And in rearranging loyalties, we must have command of their values. In the animal, the first loyalty is to himself. This is destroyed by demonstrating errors in him. The second loyalty is to his family unit. This is destroyed by lessening the value of marriage, by making an easiness of divorce, and by raising the children, whenever possible, by the state. The next loyalty is to his friends and local environment. This is destroyed by lowering his trust and bringing about reportings upon him, allegedly by his fellows or the town or village authorities. That's a snitch culture. The next loyalty is to the state, Church of Scientology, and this, for the purposes of communism, Scientology is the only loyalty which should exist. That describes 1984 and Brave New World. And finally, the tenets of rugged individualism, personal determinism, self-will, imagination, and personal creativeness are alike in the masses antipathetic to the good of the greater state, Scientology. These willful and unaligned are no more than illnesses which will bring about disaffection, disunity, divide and conquer, and at length the collapse of the group to which the individual is attached. The constitution of man lends itself easily and thoroughly to certain and positive regulation from without of all of its functions, including those of thinkingness, obedience, and loyalty. And these things must be controlled if the greater state, Scientology, is to ensue. The end thoroughly justifies the means. Did Hubbard know what he was doing? The answer is yes. Driven by greed, by his twin lusts for money and power. Oh, wait a minute, is that the LAPD too? Huh. He willfully and knowingly destroyed the lives of the thousands naive enough to follow him. L. Ron Hubbard, Pied Piper of the Soul. And then there's a lot of notes here. So that's it, you guys. I will leave a link in the description box. Like and subscribe if you choose. Have an amazing day or an amazing night wherever you are. Peace.